Welcome to this webinar for how to crack AZ-103 and give you an overview idea of how the exam is going to be, what type of questions that you will face, and what are the best practices, how to best utilize the time or the exam duration when you are in examination hall so that you attempt all the questions accurately and yet you still have some time to verify those questions and clear the examinations, right? So a little bit about myself. My name is Abhijit. I have over 10 years of experience in training, worked with organizations like VMware and Microsoft as a trainer. And right now I'm delivering training across all the corporates. So as I said, this is for people who have already appeared for AZ-103 examinations. So we'll be talking a lot about how the exam is going to be, and also we will discuss some of the topics that might not be, I have highlighted some of the topics to, just like a revision of those topics or a bird's eye view of those topics that I will be discussing here. We have very less time, like approximately 2 hours, but we have to cover most of the topics for a refresher. And also we'll be dealing with some sample questions. All right, when it comes to sample questions, I don't want to, give more time to discuss sample questions here during this live event. All right, so a little bit about the examination, right? So in the examination, I have during my training classes, many people were very curious about how the exam is going to be, what kind of questions will appear for the exam. And the most important and the most common question that I come across during my trainings or somebody who is interested in giving the exam is, when should I start preparing for the examination? That is one of the most common questions. And well, if you ask me what is the right time for starting preparing for the examination, very, very simple answer. There is no right time. Any time is a good time. It's just that, you have to be little organized on how you prepare for your exams. We completely understand that you have, your own 9-to-5 job or you're working at night, right? You generally don't get much time to prepare for the examinations, although you will be working on an Azure environment day in and day out, right? So just working on an Azure environment day in and day out is not sufficient to crack the examination, because there will be some tricky questions. There will be some questions where the answer is little unusual. So all those things that you have to be prepared and mentally prepared to give the examinations, right? So the number of questions that you may face in this examination varies from 50 to 60, and the duration of the entire examination is 180 minutes. So out of 180 minutes, that is 3 hours, you have to complete the examination in 150 minutes. That is 2.5 hours. So all your answers, everything has to be, you have to basically complete the entire examination in 2.5 hours, and the rest 30 minutes is used by Microsoft to take your feedback, and even Proctor needs some time. So remove that 30 minutes out of 3 hours. So whatever time is left is 2.5 hours for you to attempt all your questions, to perform all your labs, and also that includes the review, right? So that is very, very important. And the passing percentage is approximately 70%. So if you score 700 and above, you will be considered as pass. And where will we give this exam? So compared to previous examinations, now ever since Microsoft has tied up with Pearson VUE, you can either visit any Pearson center or you can give examination from home. So many people ask me question, oh, we can give the examination from home. That would be awesome. So I will give it from home, right? Many people, they are comfortable with home, but they have their own challenges when you try to deliver examination from home. So basically delivering examination from home is like self-proctored. So you will be monitored through the webcam of your laptop by a person sitting somewhere. And basically they will keep an eye on your actions and through the webcam. And if there is anything suspicious activity going on around you, you will be immediately disqualified. So there are a lot of challenges and around this. going for a self-proctored exam. So if you still want to go for self-proctored, I would recommend you do it from your office. That is, you book a meeting room there, and you should be alone inside the meeting room while taking the examination during the entire duration. There should not be any kind of disturbance. So I would recommend, you go ahead and put up let's say a note on the door of that meeting room stating that examination is in progress. Please do not disturb, because while you're taking an examination, some people in your company might walk in for some kind of want to talk with you, or just want to say hi, because they are not aware that you are giving an examination. So if any such thing happens while you are giving a self-proctored exam, that will lead to a disqualification, and I don't want you people to go through that. And if you are giving an examination from a test center where the computers, the proctor is there present inside the examination venue, so things will be more easier. And one more challenge what I have come across or noticed is people who are taking from home, usually they use their office laptops. And sometimes the office laptops have some kind of restriction, and because of that, certain scripts do not run, or the browser is not supported. You are not allowed to upgrade your software. So a lot of things are they can impact, and you might not be able to launch the exam interface. So that is also a problem. So if you ask me what is the best way to give the exam, please walk into any Pearson VUE center, and that is one of the hassle-free exam giving option from my point of view. It is my opinion. However, you might differ with that, but that is what is recommended from my side, right? So that is one of the things that you have to take care. And after registering okay, let's say I have registered. What do I do now? Now I don't know anything about what kind of questions appear, and what topics that I have to cover. And if I go online, they are telling me, go through all the topics, blah, 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 blah. And, I've been referring some dumps and all that. So yeah, that is all okay. That is exactly why we are holding this session, to help you with, clearing all those doubts that you might have before applying for the examination. So the type of question that we'll be dealing with in this examination, there will be different types of questions. Like you have multiple choice questions, you have build list, where you have to build a particular solution. Then you have a hot area, where you have to identify multiple answers. Then there is something called as active screen, where all your actions will be recorded. And there will be options like drag and drop, like fill in the blanks, and a drag and drop, where you have to drag a certain object and place it in the right position to complete your answer, right? And some questions will be like, just yes or no, right? But you will not have, and not all questions will, has the ability to go back. Let's say, for example, you have attempted a question and you move to the next question. And while solving for the next question, suddenly something strikes you. Okay, my previous answer should have been this, right? Most of the times you will be able to go back to attempt the question, but some questions will not let you go back. So please keep that in mind, right? And there is a fill in the blanks option also, where they'll give you a scenario, and the answer is not provided. It will be a dash, and there are multiple choices below there. You have to select the appropriate answer to complete that sentence, right? We have all dealt with fill in the blanks in our schools. Cool. So the cost, well, if you see here, the price examination cost is relatively very less for India region, right? So we have that benefit where we have to spend very less, and yet we can appear for the examination. For India region, it is approximately 4,800. And for other regions, if we have people from other countries, they have to pay slightly more than what people from India have to pay. And the validity of the certification is 2 years. I cannot really vouch for this, how long this will be there, because Microsoft, they keep on changing their policies. So let's not pay more attention to the validity of the certification, right? And the topics, the top services, what we'll be dealing with in this examinations are, the most important one is the compute, where You'll have questions all around virtual machines or the compute as a service, right? And you have network. Network has the, carries the most weightage of the marks. Then you have storage and on identity. There's also one more topic, which is managed subscription. It is not that important compared to these services. Although managing subscription, managing account and subscription is also an important task for an administrator, right? Now, these are those 5 areas or the 5 classifications from where you will be getting questions. If you say the study areas, the first one is manage Azure subscriptions and resources, which carries around 15 to 20% of the weightage. So when we say manage Azure subscription and resources, this include all those tasks which are involved managing your subscription, right? So we will discuss what are the topics that fall under this category and how do you have to prepare for those topics. The second one is implement and manage storage. So this is again a very, very simple, small, but very important study area or topic where you will be asked questions around how to deploy a storage, how to create a storage, how to secure a storage. So all those questions will be asked. So that also carries around 15 to 20% marks in the entire examination. Then the third one is deploy and manage Azure virtual machines. So deploy and manage Azure virtual machines, it is not limited only to the virtual machine. It also talks about how the security of the virtual machine, the other operations involved in the virtual machines, like customizing a VM or attaching disks, detaching disks, how to configure an IP address for VMs, static, public, all those topics are covered in this. And then we have the mammoth area or the topic that is configure and manage virtual network. As you see, this carries the maximum weightage compared to rest of the topics, that is 30 to 35%, right? Most of your questions will be around networking, because networking is the most important topic when it comes to public cloud, especially during administration, because it's the administrator who will be taking care of the network, right? So they give more importance to virtual network, and it's very, very simple, right? During your training and during your day-to-day work involving Azure, you might be dealing with virtual networks day in, day out, right? So please be prepared for the topics that fall under virtual network. I will give you an overview of all those services, right? Then the last topic, which is manage identities. Mainly the topics, they revolve around Azure Active Directory. Questions regarding Active Directory, how to secure your identities and all that. So those questions will be, they fall here, that is manage identities. So let's go ahead and see what are those topics that fall under this. If you remember, right, when during our training, this is not the, the flow that how we have learned. Although it started with managing the subscription, but there are various other topics which were not covered in, let's say, topic, right? So the first one, manage Azure subscription and resources, that carries around 15 to 20%, right? So when you say 15 to 20%, so the topics that fall under this is assigning administrator permissions, right? So what is an administrator permission? As you all know, administrator permission is nothing but giving access to Active Directory, right? Like a global administrator, billing administrator. So please refresh process of how to assign someone some kind of administrator role. Then you have topics like configuring a cost center quota and tagging, right? How to configure a billing alert and how to do a tag. What are the benefits of tagging a particular service, and how this tagging functions. Let's say if I tag one virtual machine, does that automatically tag all the components of that virtual machine, or should I go ahead and do it manually, right? So that is, these kind of questions that you might expect. Then how to configure policies, and what are the best practices, and policies generally they are configured at the subscription level. So please do a refresher on the policies as well. And last but not the least, implement management groups, right? So what are management groups? Those are the hierarchy that you can create so that it is easy for you to apply billing alerts or policies, etc., etc. So management groups, tagging, policies, cost center, these all categories fall under how do you manage your subscriptions, right? And those are the topics that come under this. And apart from that, we also have two questions around monitoring under the same topic, like how do you configure diagnostic setting on a resource, right? How do you select a particular metric? Under what circumstances you will select what metric? And how those metrics can be utilized to give a visualization of the health of that particular service at a given point of time, right? Then there will be questions around that, and how to configure an alert, right? So alert is nothing but you will select a metric and then you will define an alert for that metric based on a threshold defined by you. And once a service reaches that threshold, an alert is triggered, and that alert could be in any form, like an SMS trigger, or executing a webhook, or executing a function app, or any automation that you can think of. So please keep those things also in mind. Do a refresher what alerts do. Now, talking about alerts, right? So alerts, you will select a metric and you define a threshold. Then you will create an action group, right? And then you will define an action that could be either SMS, or it could be an email, or it invokes a webhook or a logic app. You can also configure it with an ITSM infrastructure if you have, using a connector, so that it can go ahead and automatically file a ticket with your IT support team if the service reaches the threshold, right? So there are a lot of things. So please do a refresher on these. And one important thing that you have to remember is that the questions will be based on the limitations of these alerts. For example, right, when you configure an alert, there will be, you will be able to configure only 2 metrics, or in one alert, or 1 administrative tasks in one alert, right? Either this or this, right? So you have to keep in mind. So questions will be like, how many metrics you can configure per alert, or how many administrative event that you want to configure per alert. So these kind of questions will be asked. So please do a refresher on the limitations of alerts. That is one recommendation I would want to give, right? Limitations of alert is very, very important. All right. After the alerts, then you have analyze alerts, metrics across the subscription, how to create an action group and action rules, right? And monitor for the resource utilization and reporting. How to configure, let's say, the alert can be configured at services level and also at the platform level. Let's say, for example, any administrative events that is there, and monitoring of resource, how to configure a particular service. Let's say, for example, I want to monitor a particular virtual machine. So how do you configure that virtual machine? So how do you prepare configuring that virtual machine? That is for monitoring purposes. So you will decide whether, you'll first notice whether the virtual machine is running on Azure, or if that machine is not an Azure platform. Based on that, you will take a decision, right? So please refresh on the process of configuring a virtual machine for monitoring purposes. I hope most of you have gone through the query language KQL, right? So there will be very few questions around it, but yeah, it is a good idea to go through the query KQL once again, just for preparation side. You will get few questions in our test prep also. So please go through those questions and understand the basics of how to query using KQL in your log analytics, right? And the next is managing a resource group, right? So here we'll be learning, or you will be tested on your skills on how to apply a policy at the resource group level. Although policies can be applied at the management group level, but you might get questions in or a scenario which requires you to apply a policy at the resource group and not at the management. That's how the scenario they will put across. Wherein, if you say that, okay, we will apply this policy at the management group level, that is also possible, but that is not the right answer. Some scenarios will have, or you have to decide that the policy has to be applied only at the resource group level, because only that resource group should follow that policy, right? So these kind of scenarios that you will come across when you're dealing with questions around Azure policies or resource groups, right? And what are the benefits of locking the resources, right? You can add this lock. One thing, please remember that the resource locks, it is not just restricted to resource group. You can go ahead and add a resource blocks at the service level also. That is a single service that is inside a particular resource group. Even that particular service can be configured for locks. Usually what happens when you say resource group locks, you will think that, okay, resource group lock is like something that I can do it only on the resource group. Please, it is not like that. Resource locks can be applied not only at the resource group level, it can be applied at the subscription level and even at the resources level. So please keep that in mind. There will be tricky questions around it. Then you have configure policies. We have seen that. And how to set a tagging of a resource group, etc. Now, can someone tell me, like, let's say, for example, there is one question. Okay. So if I tag, let's say, a virtual machine, there will be questions like, let's say yes or no. If I tag a particular service that is for a virtual machine, will that tag be inherited? So if you notice the behavior of the portal when you are, the answer actually is no, because when you are tagging a particular component, let's say a virtual machine, right? So the portal will ask you, do you want to apply the same tag for all the components or not? Right? So that one particular prompt is like, that makes this answer as a no, because it does not automatically inherit the tags for its components. So these kind of questions you can expect, right? And there will be questions on moving the resources across resource group. So it is possible. We all know that, it is possible to move the resources from one resource group to another resource group. And, it is possible to move the resources from one resource group to another resource group in a different subscription, right? But when the situation comes for moving the resources from one subscription to another subscription, always keep in mind that both the subscription has to be in the same tenant. Only then it is possible. That is when you are moving the resources across the subscription. Both the subscriptions should have or should be under the same tenant, and there should be one common user for both of them. Only then they support move. If the subscriptions are in two different tenants, Azure does not support migration, because we all know a tenant is nothing but one isolated environment of the users and services, right? So please remember that part. And then the question will be like, can we all the services, right, from one resource group to another or one subscription to another? Please keep in mind that, although Azure supports movement of the resources, right, there are some services which still do not support the movement of those resources. Like, for example, there are a lot of things like Express Route, for example. You cannot, once you have configured it, you will not be able to move the Express Route connection to a different subscription. So like that, there are limitations. So if you want to know what are those services that support migration, what are those services that do not support migration, we have an online document, right? So please search for moving resources between resource group, and you will have a document which will explain you or give you an idea of what services support migration and what services do not support migration. So all that details you can obtain from there. So just one quick look on those services is more than enough for you to recall or to decide what is the right answer. So if the question is like, does all services support migration to a different resource group. If the question is yes or no, in this case, the answer will be no, because not all services support migration. There might be tricky question. I don't think they will ask this kind of tricky question wherein tell me if this one particular service can be moved to a different resource group. I don't think you will come across a question like this, something that you have to refer when the situation arises, and you don't have to remember it all the time, because Microsoft is dynamic. So if there's some service which is not supporting today for the migration, maybe tomorrow in the next versions of Azure, that might support migration. So that's my personal opinion, that you might not get accurate at the services level, like which service supports migration, which service do not support migration. These kind of questions I don't think you will come across. And when I was giving the examination, even I did not come across any of such questions. But still, going through those services just once will help you a lot, right? And how to successfully delete the resource groups, and all those things that you have to just do a refresher, right? And then we have questions around RBAC roles, which is a very, very simple questions, right? All you have to remember is the custom roles and the built-in roles, right? When it comes to RBAC roles, if you see here, this RBAC role can be assigned at the subscription level, right? And three major roles are there: owner, contributor, and reader. Just go ahead and we all, it's simple. Owner basically has all the rights, like adding or making modification or making changes to the services, giving access to other persons and all that. So that is the owner. And a contributor basically has same kind of access. It's just that the contributor will not have ability to make an API call to Microsoft.access. So they will not be able to do an API call to the service provider, and hence, contributor will not be able to add a user, right? If you remember the custom RBAC roles, right, we have, things how we define allowed actions and not allowed actions, right? So based on this, what the kind of access that we want to give to a particular user, we will define what a user should access, and we will define all those resource providers under allowed action, and the things that he should not have access to, we will define them under not allowed actions. It is as simple, right? So please go through these RBAC roles, what are resource providers and what are the most common resource providers will also help you a lot, right? And how to create a custom role, that's what allowed actions, not allowed actions, right? And that is how once you're created, you can start assigning the role. And also there are built-in roles like virtual machine administrator and virtual machine contributor. So there is a lot of difference. Allow or deny, allowed action or deny. Okay. Then there are built-in roles. So please go through the roles. So if you go log into the portal, let's say I'll log in here. Okay. Portal.azure.com. Okay. So if you go here, let's say, for example, I will go to a particular resource group here, and let's say access control IAM, right? So if you go to the roles, so it will give you the details, right? So it is an owner, right? Lets you manage everything, including access to the resources. You have contributor, you have reader, you have user access administrator. Like that, there are lots and lots of them. Like, difference between let's say there is a billing reader, right? He will have access to the billing and information. So I expect questions like, if let's say you have one person in the organization who is from accounts team, and he should have access only to the billing information, and he should not have access to, let's say, any other services. What role as an administrator you will give to him, right? So that is kind of questions you can expect in this classification, right? And for that, I recommend you to just go through the most prominent roles from here and understand what they do, right? Like key vault contributor lets you manage key vaults but not access them, right? So contributor is like it will manage, but it will not access you, give you access to the key vault, right? So there are so many of them, right? So please go through these RBAC roles as well. That is very, very important. implementing RBAC policies, assigning RBAC roles. So assigning RBAC role is very, very simple. You will just have to define a scope. Again, if you're creating custom role, you will define a scope by putting a /. And if it's just a /, that means the scope is defined at the subscription level, and any resource group defined after the / will define the scope as that particular resource group, right? So that's about manage subscriptions and resources. So you may also have some lab exercises. I'm not very sure whether the lab exercises will be there just for managing subscriptions, like, move the virtual machine to a different resource group and all that. So just go ahead and practice them once. Because most of you, when you're dealing with your personal subscription, you will hardly get an opportunity to move a resource from one subscription to another. You might have done it from one resource group to another, but just give it a try. If you know someone who also has a subscription, test subscription along with you, just go ahead and add yourself to that subscription so that you're a part of the same tenant, and then you can go ahead and practice this movement of the resources from one subscription to another, right? I don't want to waste more time on discussing the questions. Like, anyhow, you will have access to our prep portal, so you will get most of the questions. So we have huge collection of questions. So I'll be only giving you the idea of tricky part of the examinations, right? So I'll be covering those topics, which will definitely help you, right? So that's about manage subscriptions and resources. Then the second topic, moving to the second topic, we have implement and manage storage, right? We all know storage, very, very important, but very, very simple. So here you can expect questions from storage like, configure network access to the storage. So if you have configure network access to storage, what is that, right? Service endpoints, remember? Then there will be questions around service endpoint. Then you create and configure storage account. This will basically test your skills, and you can expect questions like, it's not as simple as they'll ask you like, okay, go ahead and create a storage account, right? The questions that you can expect in this area is like, so and so company has a requirement, and this is a particular budget, and they have some particular sensitive data. So what kind of storage account will you create? So based on the given scenario, right? Let's say he has a sensitive data which should not go beyond a particular region or something like that. So keep that regional governance thing in mind, and also remember those performance tiers and the replication, right? So low cost or high performance, all those requirement will be given in the question. So based on the requirement, you will decide what kind of storage account you will be hosting. Either you're hosting a premium account or you're hosting a standard. If you're hosting a standard, then inside standard, what is the best? You want to go for an LRS or ZRS, GRS, etc., right? So it's based on the scenario. So once you go through the question, you should be able to decide what is the best storage account that is suited for this particular requirement. And then you have something questions around shared access signatures, that how do you generate a shared access signature to give access to a particular user or something. Always remember that there can be a questions across shared access signatures, like, is shared access signature the safest way, right? So they'll try to ask you a tricky question like that. Always, shared access signature is not always the best way, right? It is not always the best way. You should also check other options. And if none is there, then you can go for shared access signature. So don't be under impression that shared access signature is one of the best way to share data with others. That is not the case, right? So keep that in mind. Then how do you manage the access keys? How do you access that, right? So that is one, managing the access keys. There will be key 1 and key 2 that you will have access to, and you can manage them from a key vault as well. Then you have monitoring the activity log by using, every storage account comes with a diagnostic option where you can go ahead and monitor the storage account for its performance and all that, how the blobs are performing, how your other services are performing. So all those logs can be obtained from diagnostics. right? That the questions will be around them. And then you have storage replication. That's basically LRS. So in a given scenario, what is the best replication option that you can recommend to a customer? So that comes under storage replication. And implement Azure AD authentication. Like, how do you access the storage using or give access to the storage using AD authentication, right? And that could also involve RBAC role. Now, those kind of questions you can expect from create and configure storage account, right? And in the same module, they will also ask you how to create or import, export jobs. So I strongly recommend you to go through this entire process. So this is semi-technical, right? There will be also logistical process that you have to be aware of. So they will ask you an overview of how the entire import export thing works, right? And they'll give you a scenario where you have to recommend either, let's say, a data box, small data box heavy, or let's say a dedicated, let's say, online data box or offline data box. So questions will be around that. So you should be able to recommend the correct service in order to help the customer move huge amount of data. So you will basically analyze the question if the movement of the data is just once or if it is multiple, right? So, or is it frequent? Based on that, you will recommend the best data box in that question, right? And then you have something like configure Azure storage blobs. Yes, how to configure a blob. So basically what you will do is you will create a container, and that's how. So the basic rules is a blob has to reside always in a container. So the questions will be around that. And the best one, CDNs, right? How do you configure CDN? What are the benefits of the CDN, or how do you recommend the CDN? The questions will be around that. You might also expect a tricky question wherein, let's say, for example, they may ask you the CDN in context with whether it supports, is it best for static data, or if it is best for dynamic data, right? So what do you recommend CDN for, either static or dynamic? So you should be aware that CDN is best, or Azure CDN, it is only for static data, and it is not good for dynamic data. So keeping this property of CDN, you might come across questions in your examination, right? And use Azure Data Factory to transfer data to Azure. Those are these topics, right? And you can expect some questions around Azure files as well, right? So Azure files, if you say you have to understand what is a file share, and file share is nothing but what? It is just helping you manage your Office file server in the most efficient way, right? You might have multiple branch offices where you have a Windows file server installed, and that file server, all those file servers can be synced with your on the cloud, so that it can be easily managed and organized. So what are the best practices? How do you configure? So all these questions you can expect for the file server. So please go ahead and understand the entire process, do a refresher, because I'm sure not all of you will be dealing with this service day in and day out. It's very few industries, small companies, they use this service, but having an idea on how this works is very, very important. What are the benefits? Mostly they'll ask questions around the benefits, right? And to certain extent, the process as well. So like, the registration process, you'll install an agent inside the Windows file server. And basically that agent is as simple as installing your backup agent, right? So you register that, the sync service that is running in the cloud. And once everything is configured, your files will be saved on cloud, like, let's say accounts, let's say HR, like that. You can keep them all more organized and have them taken a backup on the cloud, right? And what is a sync group and all that? There will be questions around it. What is a sync group? Sync group is nothing but these services that will be synced here. So please go through that. I'm sure you might be still having access to skill pipe. So I strongly recommend to go through the skill pipe once again before you even attempt our test prep. I strongly recommend doing that. Yeah. So let's see what else do we have from storage here. Backup, right? You can expect a lot of tricky questions here from the backup, right? Because here, when it comes to Azure backup, there are lots of possibilities and limitations. Right? So, for example, can you take a backup of, or do, let's say, for example, I want to take a file and folder level backup on a Linux machine. Is that is running on a Azure? Is that supported? Right? So these kind of questions you can expect, right? So, Linux machine usually running on Azure, if it is a standalone machine, it is not supported for taking a backup, or at least file and server backup, right? So that is not supported. Then, you have decision to make where, depending on where the workload is running. For example, if that particular virtual machine is running on Azure, or if it is running on a on-prem infrastructure. And further on-prem infrastructure, it again depends whether if it is running in a Hyper-V environment using a System Center Virtual Machine Manager, SCVMM, or if it is running on VMware, hosted on ESXi servers, right? So based on this, where your workload is running, you will go ahead and configure a backup. So if you have a centralized environment, Azure backup definitely helps you to take app consistent backups, right? Please read more about what is app consistent, what is crash consistent, right? And when do you install map server, right? Or when do you install DPM, right? System Center. So map server is Microsoft Azure backup service or backup server. And this is data protection manager. Right? So do we get relevant documents? Anonymous. Can I have a name, sir? Relevant documents. What kind of documents are you pointing at? There is a question here. Do we get relevant documents for this? Can you please let me know what relevant documents you're asking? I will be able to help you with that. Right? And properties of recovery services vault. Again, very, very, very important, right? Properties of the recovery services vault. Please remember that even recovery services vault has a replication option, like either it is LRS or GRS, right? So the questions will be very tricky, right? So one thing you have to remember is that the moment you create a recovery services vault, and by default, it will be GRS. Always remember, by default, a recovery services vault that you create, it will be in GRS. And if the situation or the question is in such a way that they have to go for LRS and not GRS, in that case, after creating a recovery services vault, you have to go under configuration and then make that changes, switch from GRS to LRS. So this point you have to remember, right? So what is the default setting of a recovery services vault is this. So questions might come around that, keeping that the default configuration of recovery services vault is always at the GRS. Okay. Now coming over to backup policies, please remember there are multiple, there is always a default policy, but you can still go ahead and create your own policies, like, how many days you want to retain the daily backups, the weekly backups, monthly, and also yearly, right? So all these backups, you can configure them. And one thing that you have to remember is questions might also come from areas where looking at the property of the Azure backup, how we take backup, right? So Azure backup is always incremental backup. Please keep that in mind, right? Initially, it will take full backup, and then it's all delta syncs, right? So that makes it incremental backup. We use incremental backup is, because the backup capture process or backup taking process is faster, right? We are not worried about the restoration. We are worried about how quickly we can capture the data, and that is why Azure is using incremental backup as its backup type. So please keep this also in mind. There might be tricky questions around it, right? And restore operations and all is very, very simple, because yeah, once you take a backup, you also have an option to restore. They might ask you a lab scenario where they might ask you to take a backup of a virtual machine. I don't think they will ask you to create a backup or take a backup of a virtual machine for file and folder, because that involves installation of an agent and all. All right. Restore operations, yes, very, very simple. Well, I was saying that, they might not ask you to go and take a file and folder level backup, because that involves installing an agent, and, that is a time consuming process. Keeping in mind that, each question that you have to attempt, you hardly have around 2 minutes of time. I don't think you will get questions around taking a file and file folder level backup during your exam as a practical question. There might be theory questions around it, but you can expect a practical scenario like, let's say, configure, take a backup of this virtual machine, and it should be like, LRS, like, locally redundant. It will be like, you have to go ahead and configure a backup for the virtual machine, keeping in mind that the recovery services vault, which they have already created, the default setting is at GRS. You will have to switch it to LRS first and then configure the backup for the virtual machine. So that is a very important step that you have to remember. If you don't miss, for example, if you miss switching the GRS, the recovery services vault replication from GRS to LRS, and you got excited and you just, oh, it's a very simple task, I will go ahead and back up the virtual machine. If you do that, the answer will be wrong, because you have missed out on the most important thing, that is considering the replication of the recovery services vault. So please keep that in mind as well. Now coming over to virtual machines, which again carries around 15 to 20% of the marks. What is high availability, or what is an availability set? Availability set. So I'll give you the overall view on best practices of the availability set and all. So that way it will be easy for you to read more and understand this technology. So usually availability set is used for high availability. Pardon my spelling. Okay. So how does it work? So there are two types availability set. That is, the first one is availability set, and the second one is availability zone. Right. So you have to decide. I mean, availability set is available in all the data centers. Wherever availability zone is not available in all the data centers, it is available only in those regions where we have more than one data center, right? So those are zone level data centers. So what availability set does is, let's say, for example, I have a 2-tier application. Okay, I'm just giving you an example. So let's say a 2-tier application. So I'm drawing this as this is my VNet, and I have 2 subnets under that. Okay, so let's say these are the virtual machines that are catering to my as a web server, and they are under a load balancer, and load balancer will have a public IP address, right? So this load balancer, what it is doing is it is sending the traffic in a round robin fashion to all these 3 web servers, which are replica of each other. They are same. The configuration, the kind of web page they throw, everything is same, exactly same, right? So basically we come with a load balancer is because if any of the virtual machine goes down, the load balancer will sense that machine is down, and it will redirect the traffic between the healthy services. or healthy virtual machines, right? That way, if one virtual machine goes down, your application will not go down. And the second reason is you just have to deal with only one IP address, right? So this acts like a VIP or a virtual server IP, where you can further go ahead and configure it for DNS. And then it could be like www.abc.com, whatever website you have, right? So what does availability set does? How does it work? Availability set, right? AV set. So availability set is at the local data center level. First thing, it is at the single facility level. So what it does is whatever virtual machines you have for your web tier, let's say I have around 3 VMs, right? So what I will do is availability set ensures that all these 3 virtual machines are running on 3 separate racks. So this is rack 1, rack 2, and rack 3. Okay, so this is one physical rack, second physical rack, and third physical rack. Each physical rack is known as one fault domain. So this will be fault domain 0, fault domain 1, and fault domain 2, right? So in this rack there will be several Hyper-V hosts running inside the Azure data center. So what happens is when you configure any virtual machine inside an availability set, Azure will make sure that those virtual machines are not sitting on a single fault domain, but they are distributed across multiple fault domain. Because in case if this entire rack fails, you still have your virtual machines safe. So this will help you overcome an unplanned disaster. I mean, disasters can't be planned. So it's like an event of a disaster or unplanned maintenance and all that. So this will save your workload, right? And in the same high availability, it's not just the fault domain. You also have something called as update domain. So update domain is nothing but, here fault domain is physically isolated. Update domain is virtually isolated across the nodes, which are spread across, different fault domains. So in this case, let's say this rack, and node from this rack, and this rack. These 3 are tagged as update domains. That means UD0, UD1, UD2, like that. So whenever you have a maintenance running inside the Azure data centers, so they have to push the firmware upgrades and all those things, and for that they might have to reboot the server, and that could potentially bring down your environment. So in order to avoid such kind of downtime, either it is for planned maintenance, unplanned maintenance, or a disaster, you will go ahead and configure availability set. So availability set will ensure that your workload is sitting on multiple fault domains and multiple update domains. So the default fault domain, number of fault domains that you get in Azure is 2. That is the default, right? But the maximum fault domain you will get is 3, right? So this is for fault domains. Keep this mind or number in mind. In some regions, it is only 2 fault domains. So this is not true with all the data centers. Some data centers offer you 2, some data centers offer you 3. That is for fault domains, but it is not more than 3. When it comes to update domains, the default value is 5 and it might go up to 20. Okay, so please keep these numbers in mind, right? And when it is availability set, right? So this rack 1, rack 2, rack 3, they come from same data center, right? That is availability set. When you go to availability zone, these racks come from different zones. Those are like 500 kilometers separated from each other. So it's give you a physical isolation of the data center level, not at the rack level. Availability set will give you a protection if there is a failure at the node level. If the entire DC goes down, this will not come to your rescue, right? Wherein an availability zone, which is available only in few regions, if the entire data center goes down, then your workload is still safe because the rest of the virtual machines are scattered across different physically isolated data center in the same region. So that is the difference between availability set and availability zone. So please learn more about these, do a refresher. This is what I'm doing is like, just quick overview. It's like a bird's eye view that I'm giving. Okay, so we are done with high availability, right? And one thing you have to remember is that when it comes to high availability, please remember that you cannot add an existing virtual machine to an availability set, right? Please remember that. You have to recreate that virtual machine either using a template, or you just recreate that VM and define an availability set in the template and then push it. Yeah, that is very, very important. So that is high availability. Then comes monitoring, networking, storage, size of the virtual machine, and how to configure scale sets. Right. Monitoring, I don't want to talk much about it. It's very, very simple how to configure a VM for monitoring purposes. Basically, what you will do is you will pull out the metrics and diagnostic logs from the operating system level and push it to your log analytics. You use metrics for visualization, right? We know that process. When it comes to networking, questions might come around like, what is the possibility of having a public IP address, whether it is, can be switched to static, or can we switch it to dynamic? And what are the drawbacks of switching the state of the IP address? Is there a downtime involved in switching the IP addresses? Such kind of questions are asked. And when it comes to storage, they might ask you to attach a kind of disk by giving a scenario to you. For example, X company wants so many IOPS and they don't want to spend more. So what is the best disk you recommend, right? So you will be asked to create a particular disk with particular IOPS, right? So you will have to decide whether you have to go for a premium disk or you have to go for a standard disk based on the IOPS requirement. So please go through the IOPS requirement of both, you have P1, P2 disks and all that. So please just run your eyes once through it, and it will be very easy for you to complete that lab. Yeah. And then switching to virtual machine size. First thing, remember, not all sizes are available in all the regions, but they might ask you, how do you go ahead with switching the sizes, right? So there is a reboot involved, and they might also ask you like, what is scaling, right? That is vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. All those questions will be around that. Vertical scaling is basically where you equip a particular virtual machine with more resources, right? So that is vertical scaling. And what is horizontal scaling? You increase the number of VMs to get that compute capacity, right? So this is from small to big, like that, right? So please keep in mind when you have to go for vertical scaling, when you do for horizontal scaling, right? And talking about scaling, the most important service when it comes to scaling a virtual machine is your VM scale set, right? So what are virtual machine scale set? What are the best practices? They might give you a scenario setting that X company wants to move to the cloud because they want to upscale and downscale for the incoming traffic, which is very inconsistent. And what do you recommend? So you should be able to recommend based on the requirement whether you want to go for a scale event based on a schedule, or manual, or a scale event based like automated, auto scale, right? So you should be able to decide whether the auto scale works best, or a manual scale works best, or a schedule scale works best. Based on the scenario, you should be able to recommend the right answer. So please work out on some scenarios wherein what is scheduled, manual, and auto scale, how it comes. And when it comes to auto scale, what are the things that you have to keep in remember? How do you monitor, or how do you decide an auto scale should trigger, right? So you will select a metric, right? And then based on that metric, you will define a threshold, right? A threshold, let's say 70%. And whenever the resource reaches the threshold of 70%, the auto scale should trigger automatically, right? So it is not just you can use only one metric. So you can use multiple metrics and based on that, you can configure your policy. So you should know the entire process of creating an auto scale set. What are the minimum information that is required? And when you're doing auto scale, it's always for one particular tier. One virtual machine scale set is used for one particular tier. That will be like web tier or your business tier, or it could be a data tier, right? So this works at the tier level. That is, you should not be mixing services from different tiers. So it is always dedicated for one tier. Please keep that in mind. What are the different scenarios? You can think of a couple of scenarios where you can assign scheduled, manual, or auto scale. What are the metrics? Usually, if it is a web server, you not use only CPU percentage as the metric. You might also need to take a look at the network services also in order to trigger the auto scale function, right? So depending on the workload, you will decide what metrics to consider for configuring an auto scale. And also remember that auto scale, you can switch from manual to auto without having to recreating the services, right? So always keep that in mind. That is very, very important. Also, creating an image, how to create an image. First, in order to create an image, let's say a Windows VM, right? You need to do something called as sysprep for Windows VM. Very, very important, right? So keep that in mind, sysprep, and then you will do capture, right? If it is a managed virtual machine. So all these things, this is like a kind of a refresher for you people, right? I hope it is helping you out. So that is there. And can we upgrade an operating system for Windows virtual machine? The answer is no, we cannot upgrade. We can update it, but we cannot upgrade it, right? So these are small things, right? You have to remember. Usually, people tend to forget these small things, and that might end up in selecting an incorrect answers, right? I don't want you people to do that. So these are very basic things that I'm trying to cover, right? Now, coming over to ARM templates. So I don't think there will be any lab scenarios where they will ask you to create an ARM template, but there will be a lot of questions around this. When is a template used? Remember that ARM templates is used for repetitive deployments, and they are customizable and reusable, and they're modular in nature, right? So these are JSON format, right? JavaScript object notation, which works on a key and a value pair, right? Very important. And then comes configuring the location of the VMs inside this, like, you will say default resource group location and all that. I hope you have worked on ARM templates post your training, right? Then how to configure a VHD template. So there will be questions around it, not necessarily that, they will ask you to do this as a part of your lab exercise, right? So there will be questions around this, and how to deploy a particular service using a template, and how do you save a template? How do you deploy a Windows or a Linux virtual machines using a template and all that, right? Very, very simple. Then coming to the managing VM part, right? We are still in the VM. So as I was saying, how to add a data disk, how to detach a data disk, right? So that is very, very important. So what I recommend, guys, when it comes to your practicals, right? I strongly recommend for you guys to go ahead and do or work on the portal. That is the best thing I can recommend, because there is something called as performance-based testing, what they do. So in most of the scenarios when you are doing the lab, the screen is captured, right? And based on that, you are evaluated on how quickly you go ahead and configure a particular service. Are you struggling somewhere, or you are very well versed with the portal and it just took you a few clicks and you configured that. So this happens in the background. Please remember, this is called as performance-based testing, where the screen is captured for your actions, right? So for that, in order to get the maximum marks in such scenarios, you need to be well versed with the portal. If you are not well versed with the portal, if you're fumbling here and there, you're trying to find where particular option is, you are not only losing out of time, you are also showing that you are not that great with the portal, right? So please get used to the portal as much as possible for those kind of work that you don't do on a day-to-day basis, right? Please practice those actions, find out where which options lies where and all that. That will be very, very helpful. And please perform actions like how to add a network interface. One thing is that when you are adding a disk, that there's no challenge in here. When you have a task of adding a network interface, you have to ensure that VM is not running, right? So these things should quickly come into your mind, and you should be immediately following the right process of attaching a network interface. So you have to just select the virtual machine, see if it is running. If it is in running state, stop that virtual machine. And once the virtual machine is stopped, then you will be able to attach or detach a network interface. But when it comes to data disk, you don't have to do that. You can attach a data disk while the virtual machine is running, right? So all these things that you have to remember when it comes to labs. So you can expect a lot of these kind of actions in your lab scenarios, like add data disk, add network interface, configuring management using PowerShell DSC and your virtual machine agent were custom script extensions, right? So when you are creating a virtual machine, PowerShell DSC, right? So it will let you configure a certain application inside a virtual machine while it is being created. Or you can install an agent for, let's say, for example, a Jenkins or a Puppet agent you want to install on the VM, or you want to run a PowerShell script which makes that virtual machine join a particular domain, right? So there might, I'm not that very sure that they will ask you a lab scenario for this, because these takes usually a lot of time. So from that aspect, I'm saying that they will not ask you complicated labs. So they will ask you simple labs where you can quickly go ahead and configure the settings, and they will evaluate you based on how accurately you have configured and how quickly you have configured, right? So that is a new thing that is called as performance-based evaluation, right? Then how do you manage virtual machine sizes? Then move VMs from one resource group to another. How do you redeploy VMs? And what is soft delete option for VMs? All these are very, very important, right? Now coming over to managing backups, we have already discussed about it, VM backup, how to define a backup policy, implement a policy, and they might ask you to take a backup and restore a particular virtual machine, right? You can never know. When it comes to Azure Site Recovery, there won't be much technically related questions about Azure Site Recovery, like technical aspect of the ASR, but you can expect questions from Azure Site Recovery, like for example, check this out. What does ASR does, right? In an event of disaster, it will fail over from your primary to your failover site, right? So this is the job. So usually the questions will be like, what are the best uses of it? It's not just the failover. You should also remember that Azure Site Recovery doubles up as your data migration tool. For example, when you are, when you want to move your on-prem data center to cloud, so Azure Site Recovery will come very, very handy, because it will not only let you assess the migration process, but it will also go ahead and literally transfer the data from your on-prem to cloud, so that you might expect those kind of questions around Azure Site Recovery. Now we have the most important topic, that is your virtual networks, right? Configure and manage virtual network, which carries around 30 to 35% of the marks. Very, very, very important and very interesting, if you ask me. This and AD are one of my favorite topics, right? So when it comes to networking, there you can have a lot of lab scenarios. So totally there will be 2 to 3 labs with 15 to 15 tasks, I guess, right? So it will go up to 15 tasks. So this will be your entire lab scenarios. So 2 labs with 15 tasks is what you have to do during this examinations, right? And I can vouch for this, right? They will definitely ask you a question to establish a peer between 2 virtual networks as a lab exercise. Very, very simple, but very, very important. And also the questions around that, apart from lab, you can expect questions like, when it happens, expect a scenario using Azure backbone network, right? And all that. So that will be from the peering concept. Now, and the second one is configure VNet to VNet connections. How do you do that? Site to site VPN and all that, using S2S and express route, etc., etc., etc. So this not just VNet to VNet. So all connectivity, whatever connectivity from any location to Azure. So basically, it is peering. Then you have site to site, point to site. Very rare. So don't expect, there might be a tricky question based on this point to site. So what is point to site? It's basically letting one computer connected to the VNet using a VPN that is deployed here inside your gateway subnet, right? So this will use some called as self-signed certificates. Right? So this is point to site, one single user, probably he's a roaming profile, right? So if they want to access the network, as an administrator, you will configure point to site. So when to configure site to site, when to configure point to site, when do you go for peering, and what are the benefits of peering? Please have an overview of that. Very, very important. And also verifying virtual network connectivity is also important. How do you verify that? The first option is either use network watcher, right? They are expecting you to give an answer based on these kind of tools that Azure already has. Verifying network connectivity, right? So when you go to network watcher, you will see this, right? So there's one. So what does connection monitor does, right? It will let you monitor the connectivity between 2 points. Then this is still under preview. They won't ask you any questions from a service that is in preview. Network performance monitor. So these are the diagnostic tools that you might have to look on. That is how IP flow verify works. When do you use next hop? What are effective rules? And all that. Most of the questions will be around next hop and the NSG rules, right? So whenever it comes to diagnosing a particular network scenario, always keep in mind network watcher is a tool which is already available. So your answer should involve this, unless it is very, very specific that does not require involvement of a network watcher, right? So in an option like in the options, if we have a ping or network watcher and all those things, right? So please go through those questions carefully and then select the right answer for that. Now, in a lab scenario, what happens is, they would have already created, let's say, for example, you come across a lab scenario for connecting to virtual networks, right? So when you are, it doesn't mean that, you have to go ahead and create a virtual network, deploy 2 virtual machines in that, and then establish connectivity. No, things won't be like that. They would have already created the virtual network. The name of the virtual network and everything will be there inside the question, right? You go through the question and they would have already created 2 virtual networks with 1 virtual machine each, or sometimes there won't be any virtual machine. You just have to show your skill how quickly you connect between those 2 existing virtual network, right? So let's say if it is a peering, so you will see network A and network B that is defined in the question will already be present in the portal, exam portal, right? So you log into the portal, the credentials will be there on the the exam page itself. You use those credentials, you log into the portal, and you identify that particular network. There might be other network also, right? So you have to be very careful with the name. For making it complicated, what they do is they'll create 3 different networks, almost similar name, right? So if you end up configuring a wrong network with, that will be a problem. So that will be like, you will not get any marks for that. It will be an incorrect answer. So please pay attention to the names of the network which they are asking you to peer, right? Very, very important, right? And what are different types of connections, VNet to VNet connections, etc., etc. And yeah, we saw the virtual network connectivity. Network watcher is the key, right? And now comes DNS. You may also get a task around DNS. They might have given you a VM and they might ask you to go ahead and configure a DNS name for that. So usually that task will be like, on the portal itself that is using this DNS name, VM1 dot, let's say, cloud app dot, whatever the DNS name it gives. So you should be able to go ahead and configure a DNS name, or at least you should know the process of that. And the difference between private and public IP addresses, how to configure them, network routes, network interface, subnet, virtual network, name resolution, etc. So when it comes to private, so Azure VNet is always, it gives you a private range of private IP. Then public IP addresses, yes, there are two types of public IP addresses, basic and standard. Please keep in mind there are two different types of public IP addresses. Network routes, it's basically about your UDR, user defined routes, and also there will be questions around your system routes, right? And the hierarchy, they might give you a scenario, what is the priority given, right? So the priority will work as UDR holds the highest priority. Then comes your BGP propagation, border gateway protocol, right? If the presence of BGP, first the traffic will check the presence for UDR. If it is not present, then it will check for BGP. If BGP is not present, then system routes come into picture, right? So you should be aware of this, the priority which is given when it comes to routing. Yeah. Then how to configure Azure DNS? There are two, right? So one is public and another one is private, right? Private, when you create a zone, that will hold records for all the DNS records for that public zone, right? And the private is isolated to a network wherein you can add multiple networks to it. So there will be one network which is the host or the registrar, and you can add more, associate more networks. And also when it comes to private zone, you have an option for something called as auto register, right? So please keep that in mind also, right? What is auto register, and different types of records, right? So please go through them. What is an A record and what is AA, right? Then CNAME, then TXT, then what else? There are lots of them, right? So you should know A record is for your IPv4. This is for IPv6. This is from one URL to another URL. This is for like verifications, right? So there are lots of records, right? You have PTR records, the pointer records, which is for reverse lookup, right? SOA, statement of authority, most of them. And one thing is that you have to remember there's something called as record sets, right? What is the maximum capacity of record sets? Is 20 records for same. Let's say, for example, you have an IP address like 1.1.1.1, right? And there is a domain name abc.com. So if this is a record, right, if it's a record, you can add multiple IP addresses which will point to the same record. For example, 2.2.2.2, 3.3.3. Like that, you can go up to 20, which will point to the same domain, right? Those are called as record sets. Please keep that in mind, right? And also please practice how to configure private and public DNS zones. Very simple, not complicated at all. It's just that once you work on this, it will, refresh all those options. Like, as I said, like, not everybody will be working on all the services on a daily basis. Some people might be like, your job role might be a storage administrator, or you might be restricted having access only to the virtual machines, or in some cases network, right? So thinking that, okay, I work on Azure on a daily basis, I will be able to crack it. That is again depends on how, what kind of work you do on Azure. But my strong recommendation is to do all the labs at least twice or thrice, right? And that way you will be like well versed with the all the changes, latest changes that has happened, right? Because last time when you have configured a particular service was probably in a classroom, and now you have never went that side, and Microsoft has, let's say, made some changes on the portal which you are not aware because you have never done that lab again. So you should not be surprised in the examination hall. Oh, what is this? The portal has been changed, right? So you don't want to be in that situation. So please go ahead and try to spin each and every service at least once, right? That way you will be aware of all the changes that has happened so far on the portal, and you don't have those surprise moments in the examination, right? So you don't want to be in that situation. Please don't avoid any labs. Please do all these labs at least once. You have a Git repository for these labs. Just search for AZ-103 Git on Google. You'll get all the labs. I'm sure you know, right? That is one. And now coming over to NSGs, you will get a scenario where they will ask you to configure an NSG rule, right? So basically you have two places where you will be configuring. One is for incoming traffic and for outgoing, right? Based on the scenario, you will whitelist those ports either in incoming traffic or outgoing traffic. And also please be aware of what are those the default NSG rules which cannot be modified or changed, right? So please remember that limitation. What are default NSG rules and how do they work? And how do they work is not required. You, of course, you know how it works. It's just that, preparing yourself will give you that confidence where you will be able to solve those questions without any problem, right? And what are the limitations of NSG, right? So you can apply it only at the subnet level or at the interface level. You cannot apply it at the VNet level. For VNet, we have firewall, right? So we will not use NSG on this, right? How to identify required ports and etc. etc. These are really good. What are security rules? And what are application security rules? You might expect a couple of questions from here. It's a very beautiful concept. Please read more about it. Application security groups, right? Then coming over to load balancer, how load balancer works, right? I'm sure you know how it works. So here Azure load balancer, remember it's a layer 4 load balancer, right? So it does not discriminate between any kind of HTTP, HTTPS traffic and all that. So it's a layer 4, works at transport layer, right? So you have to be sure with all these kind of things, right? So what is that load balancer? How many front ends I can create? And yeah, basically all that. What are backend pools? What is the step? What are the steps? So basically you will configure front end, then front end pools, and then backend pools. Then you will have you have to configure health probes and load balancing rules, and if required, incoming NAT rules. Right? It is not mandatory. Incoming NAT rules is not mandatory, but these 4 are very, very important when configuring a load balancer, right? What are load balancer rules? What are public load balancer? What is a internal load balancer, right? And how to troubleshoot a load balancer. Usually you don't get questions around this, but more questions around how to configure a load balancer and manage it. Very, very important. And yeah, I think we have covered this under Network Watcher. So please understand or deploy a Network Watcher, right? How to monitor the connectivity between 2 resources, how to see the next hop, how to capture the packets, etc. etc. Please do them once, right? So that will be very, very helpful. when it comes to tackling the questions around the network diagnostics and monitoring and troubleshooting as well. Right. And now coming over to the connectivity. So you have VPN gateways. Yeah. So how to configure an Azure VPN gateway? What are the different SKUs? I don't think they will ask you questions around the SKUs, but you should be aware when to use virtual network gateway and when to use local network gateway, right? So this is one thing you have to remember or pay attention to. And how to configure a site-to-site VPN. And there will be theoretical questions on express route. Don't expect any lab scenario on this, right? How to verify the connectivity, etc. So always make sure that there was a time where you had to manually create a gateway subnet before deploying VNG or LNG, right? But now there is a change on the portal. Please remember that the portal has been changed. And now you can directly go ahead and start creating a virtual network gateway, or that is VNG or LNG. And on the same blade, it will let you create a gateway subnet, right? It's not like before. So if you have not practiced it again, please go ahead and do that, and you will see a noticeable change in the portal, right? So there will be questions around VNG and LNG. And one thing, guys, for peer-to-peer, there was, when you had to establish connectivity between two regions or network in two regions, two separate regions. Earlier, it wasn't possible. Now the Azure backbone network is connected across all the data centers. You don't need to go via internet to establish connectivity from one virtual network to other virtual network when they are both on Azure, right? So this is not required. Now you can go ahead and just peer across any virtual network in any region, and that is your global peering, right? When I started training, the global peering was just begun. It was whitelisted only for few regions. Now it has, all the regions have been whitelisted. So that's the last topic, that is manage identities, right? So Azure Active Directory, very, very important. Apart from network, if you ask me what is the next important topic, is AAD, Azure Active Directory. Now, when it comes to AD, yeah, when it's come to Azure AD, how to add a custom domain, right? So by either creating a TXT record or MX record, you can add a custom domain to your tenant, right? Then now what are the benefits of AD join? That is very, very important. And how do you configure SSPR, right? Self-serve password reset, and how to manage multiple directories. So I just want to give you an overview of AD, right? So I'll just draw this. Okay. So now first, let's go ahead and check this out. Let's say you have enterprise portal, which will be accessed from ea.azure.com. Okay. And under this enterprise portal, you'll have something called as EA enrollment. And under EA enrollment, you have departments. You can create department. Under department, you will have accounts. And under accounts, you will have subscription, right? Check this out. And these subscriptions are governed by your Azure Active Directory. Now there is another portal which is called as accounts portal, right? This is at account.azure.com, something like that, right? Then you have management portal, that is portal.azure.com, right? And this accounts portal, right? Only these people can access it, right? Wherein the subscription here, apart from management portal, now you can say you have some API clients, REST API with CLI, or let's say a Visual Studio. These all communicate with your ARM, right? Under Azure Resource Manager, right? This Azure Resource Manager has two flavors to it. One part is for audit and reporting, let's say, and here is for operations, right? So this part will take care of your billing and compliance and all that, and this part will let you create resource groups, right? So how do you create resource group? And these are the resource groups. Inside these resource group, you have, let's say, services, and those services can interact with your on-prem, like your on-prem infrastructure through site to site, express route, etc. And these on-prem services can also use AAD Connect, communicate with your Azure Active Directory, right? And this Azure Active Directory can further be used for your SaaS applications and other cloud service providers, right? And this subscription is also connected like so. So this is the rough idea that I'm trying to give here, the total scenario, right, of Azure. So how the authentication happens, how AD comes into picture and all that, it's very, very important, right? How to add a custom domain. Basically, you need to own a domain if it is a public domain, right? And then you will do the process they'll ask, how do you verify a domain? So basically what you will do, you create a TXT record, add it out to the domain service provider, and then verify that. And benefits of AD join, how to configure self-service password reset, how to manage multiple directories, right? That's very, very important. Then how to create users and groups, right? They might ask you questions around creating a users and group. They'll give you a PowerShell command and they'll ask you to rearrange the command in the right way, right? So it will be like drag and drop, right? They might ask you in that. And how to manage properties. I don't think there will be questions around here, but of course, creating a users, there will be a question. And how to manage device settings, and how do you perform bulk user updates? So you might expect some multiple choice questions also. Earlier, bulk user updates were possible only through PowerShell. Now it is integrated on the portal, right? Please remember that. And how do you manage guest accounts, right? So yes, it's very, very, guest accounts is like, anything which is not on your domain, like a user from different company and all that. Yeah. So those are guest accounts, right? Very, very important. That is how do you install Azure AD Connect? I don't think they will ask you to install Azure AD Connect. You never know, right? But you should know, apart from this, how do you configure password hash sync and pass-through authentication, right? So that is very, very, very important. What is password hash sync and what is pass-through authentication? Pass-through authentication is it's mainly used when you want to replace your ADFS server, right? So the job of ADFS server, you want to get it done through Azure AD. That is when you go pass-through authentication. And yeah, that is one of the benefit you get on AAD, right? And how to configure, yeah, AAD basically, connecting with your ADFS, right? Then how to manage AD Connect. What is AD Health, right? How do you keep an eye whether the users and everything is syncing on time, right? So that AD Health status you can check, right? Password, and what is password write back, right? So password write back feature should be enabled. So when there is a question around SSPR, self-serve password reset, right? Always ensure that you somehow, this feature is checked while installing the AAD Connect, that is the password write back. Then very simple things, how to configure MFA, what are the best practices, right? And what are those things involved in MFA, right? Multi-factor authentication. My MFA is like, something you have, something you are, and all that. Remember, and or something you know like a password, something you have like a device, something you are like a biometric, right? So all these can be used for MFAs. And how to enable MFA, there is a separate portal where you have to enable that, right? How do you configure fraud alerts? How do you configure bypass options? There will be very simple theoretical questions around these, right? And trusted IPs, wherein you don't want MFA to be pushed, right? So this is available right there on the MFA portal, right? That is very, very important. And verification methods, like you want when a customer or let's say wants to when you're enabling SSPR to your users, you can configure different verification methods like security questions, a code sent to a mobile as an SMS, or a push notification on mobile app, etc., etc. It's very, very important. So just go ahead and do one lab around these, and that should take care of it. This is the phone number or office 0888 000 2200, sales@cloudbat.in. Yeah, or you can also drop me an email or visit our website. I hope it was helpful for you, right? And please be in touch with us if you need any more details or assistance, and we'll be glad to answer all your queries, right? I hope the session was helpful. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, people. Signing off. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.